When it comes to board games, Oath is about as enigmatic of a phenomenon as you can get. A monster of a Kickstarter with thoroughly documented development for years up until its release, and now that it's here, people still have a hard time understanding and explaining what the heck the game is. Is it an area control game? Political game? What player count? Is this really a campaign game or no? What's up with the Fox dude? Is this Root 2? So to answer these questions, let's take it from the top. The seeming fanatical devotion to Oath is built on pedigree. This is a Leder Games follow-up to the immensely successful Root. Sure, they've had releases between the two, but one was a standalone revamp of a prior game, and the other was a small-scale re-implementation of another. Oath, however, is their first totally original release from the same publisher, designer, and artist as their woodland game of Might and Right. And not to say too little of Kyle Ferrant's artwork, which on its own is an immediate invitation to board the hype train, being one of the most original, imaginative, and cohesive artists in the biz. But between PAX Premier 2nd Edition and Root, there's a sort of cult that's grown around designer Cole Worley, the hipster wargamer's designer du jour. Cole is charismatic and thoughtful about his approach to game design, transparently documenting the evolutions and inspirations for his games, consistently innovative but maintaining a sort of old-school, unyielding approach to conflict, economy, and pressure. And now is the part where I say that Root and PP2 were both in my recently published top 10, so yeah, I'm a bit of a fan. So with this immense pedigree, it's no wonder that the Kickstarter was an incredible success, but even as people were putting their monetary faith in the creative team, there was a lingering question that even the people behind the game still struggled to adequately explain. What exactly is this game? There are really two main aspects of Oath that are inexorably linked, but are best taken one at a time. What is this game from an individual session perspective, and what is this game from an ongoing legacy or campaign point of view, both of which feel so alien in the current gaming landscape that to understand either, it's best to approach the game from a thematic lens, and we'll start with the game itself. Oath is about an existing empire in a time of turmoil where charismatic leaders are vying for supremacy by obtaining the fanatical devotion of the population. Think Aragorn fulfilling his destiny in Return of the King, Paul Atreides inspiring a jihad, or Stannis the Manus swearing to overthrow the unlawful king while holding a questionably cool flaming sword. Regardless of the role you play, in Oath you win by having a declared objective, fulfill that commitment, and hold on to it for a period of time, demonstrating to the denizens of the land both your capability and your right to rule. Do that before anyone else and you win. So how does this work in mechanical terms? Brass tacks, when you sit down to play, what is this game? Well, Oath is an asymmetric game, though not asymmetric in the player power sense, but asymmetric in that each game a player can have one of three roles. One player will always be the Chancellor, the figurehead of the existing empire, and all other players will be either exiles, outright challengers to the throne, or citizens, lackeys of the Chancellor who are hoping to prove their worth and inherit the kingdom. By default, and in my experience much more frequently than not, non-Chancellor players are exiles on account of having a clearer goal, and honestly, it's more fun to fight the power. Structurally, the game is played over different locations divided amongst 3 regions on the board, where the majority of your force and influence is represented by your pawn occupying one space at a time. And just like real estate, location is everything. It often gives you powers, it dictates what cards in play you can interact with, where you discard cards to, the cost of movement to other areas, and who you can fight. And yes, there is fighting in this game. More on that in a bit. As the Chancellor, you start the game with the clearest goal, the existing oath that your empire was founded upon. This can be to control the most locations in play, hold either the banner of the darkest secret or the people's favor, or hold the most banners and relics in general, both of which offer gameplay bonuses themselves. Starting at the end of round 5, if the Chancellor is the Oath Keeper, meaning that they are fulfilling this game's oath, they roll a die and have a chance to win then and there, with each round increasing your likelihood of sealing the deal. If no one else has won by the end of the 8th round, the Chancellor wins the game. No one effectively challenged your legacy, so you don't have to prove yourself. As a citizen, which you can either start the game as or become through an agreement with the Chancellor during the game, you can only win by completing the successor goal at the bottom of the game's oath, winning in the same way via dice roll or at game's end. Think of it as the inside baseball political victory. The Chancellor may see converting exiles to citizens as minimizing the overwhelming opposition, as you no longer directly compete against the Chancellor as a citizen, but it also frees you up to subvert the Chancellor. And of course, there are ways to be exiled or even abandon your own citizenship mid-game, both of which come at a heavy cost. As an exile, your job is a bit different. From the get-go, you can usurp the oath. If you fulfill its conditions, you get the Oathkeeper banner. Hold it till the start of your next turn, and it flips to the usurper side. Hold that until the start of one more turn, and boom, you win. You shamed the establishment, showing that you could fulfill the oath better than them. Alternatively, amongst the deck of cards are 5 visions that players can draw into, and because when you draw cards you draw 3 and pick 1, and there's an extremely low limit of cards you can carry, up to 3 cards called your advisors in either face up or face down state that effectively act as your hand, visions crop up quickly, and the ones that players don't want to pursue end up in discard piles, which themselves can be drawn from. Each vision has a victory condition that you can reveal as an exile and commit yourself to it. If you begin your turn while meeting the vision's requirements, bam, everyone loves a visionary and you win the game. So structurally, this game is all about declaring victory conditions, fulfilling their requirements, and disrupting others from meeting theirs. Once you wrap your mind around that, everything else is just details. Well, in this case, lots of details. But the basics are that players each get 1 turn in a round, and on your turn, Chancellor, Citizen, or Exile, you'll first check for victory conditions, then take as many actions as you want with the only requirement that you spend necessary supply, then at the end of your turn do some cleanup, including refilling your supply based on how many warriors are left in your unused pool. Basically, the more that you have active in play, the more it costs to support your army, resulting in the fewer actions you can take on your turn, which is really cool. You, especially the Chancellor, can stretch yourself too thin in this game. Actions can be moving your pawn to different locations, including unexplored locations that upon your arrival are revealed and might be populated with relic cards, which through another action can be recovered, paying the cost as described on the location. You can draw cards from the deck or your region's discard pile, playing one of the drawn cards to either your current location or to your advisors, impacting who gets to interact with it and in what ways. You can trade resources based on cards at your location, spending money for secrets for money, use money to muster troops, placing them on your player board, all of which will be useful for obtaining banners, relics, and control of the locations, which all play vital roles in the various victory conditions players can be marching toward. And all of this is heady and nuanced, with loads of conditions and exceptions and limitations to each and every rule, but most importantly, it works. It feels fair, balanced, smooth, and smart. Loads of predictability mixed with heavy helpings of mitigatable luck. Oath expects a lot out of its players to wring the most out of it, but ultimately it's the implications of why you are doing what you do that's the hardest to understand, whereas the individual actions, thanks to the great connective tissue of theme and fantastic user interface, become intuitive over time. Perhaps the most complicated and yet smartest thing outside of the victory condition and role-reversing madness the game has set upon the gaming population is combat. Combat is a utilitarian thing in Oath, both a source of pressure so players don't leave themselves too vulnerable, and an alternative means to an end. Almost everything you can fight over has alternative ways to obtain. The banners for the darkest secret in people's favor can be contested using money and secrets, relics can be discovered, and locations can be traveled to, but sooner or later someone is going to want to take an opponent's stuff, and so they can take the campaign action. Unlike a traditional dudes on a map game, your dudes on the map are more just defensive sentinels showing ownership of a terrain and beefing up the defense. Your ability to attack, however, is based on the warbands on your player board, effectively the posse roaming around with your pawn. But when you campaign against an opponent with presence at your location, you can declare any number of their possessions as targets, not just your current location, but other locations they control. And if their pawn is at your location, the stuff they hold too. The rub is that the more stuff that you target, the more defense dice they get to roll, adding to the defense conferred by the warbands on their board and the locations you're attacking. And being that defense dice have multipliers, they get progressively more nasty the more that get rolled. Like everything else in Oath, there's a load of flexibility in how you employ combat, but it comes at a heavy cost. It can be a grand uprising trying to seize control in numerous locations, or it can be an extremely directed attack trying to obtain a banner or important relic for its strategic benefit or a role in fulfilling a victory condition. Ultimately though, it's just one more path to push yourself to victory or to obstruct someone else's. Just as mysterious as the gameplay itself is the fact that the outcomes of a game shape the world played in the next. And while I do really like the layered and somewhat temperamental structure of the individual game, it's the ambition of this ever-evolving world that I find most endearing. When a game ends, the winning faction has established or upheld their leadership over the land, swearing an oath that their descendants will uphold, defining the central victory condition of the next game. After all, decades or centuries later, the charismatic exile who overthrew the monarchy is now just the new chancellor. The locations they controlled become the new starting locations representing their seat of power. The relics they held will populate the imperial reliquary, the offerings used to bribe exiles into citizenship during the game, and the alignment or suit of the winner's advisors will evolve the denizens deck, where 6 new cards will replace a random 6 cards that were discarded or used by losers during the game. The winner can offer other factions to start as citizens of the Empire during the next game, and entrenched leadership without upheaval, meaning chancellors that upheld their dynasty can create edifices, sort of permanent monuments that start in play. And while all of this has important mechanical implications, the beauty and true brilliance of Oath's design is that it changes the world without changing the game, so to speak. This is not a campaign game. You'll not have to play the same faction over and over again. You do not accrue buffs and debuffs or shape long-term asymmetry, throwing balance completely out of whack. You don't have to play with the same players, telling a cohesive story, relying on ever more precarious scheduling, because campaign games take dedication, and life is, well, life. Oath is a game where you can see the echoes of the past. Games will evolve the shape of the world, giving the setting a lived-in depth, and the lingering denizens and locations and oaths will definitely impact player decisions, but it's designed in a way that it doesn't betray its balance. Every game is a new chance for upheaval, a new story in the world, a chapter that can be played at different player counts or with different players. And even a victory that leads to a good starting position by the next game's chancellor means little, because chancellors can't win until later in a game, and overextended players only have so much supply, so eventually, like Rome, even the strongest of empires can fall. And that in itself is wonderfully freeing and beautifully thematic. I love this game. It's thematic, ambitious, strategically empowering, probably the most gorgeously illustrated game I've played, and while it feels incredibly convoluted at first, with time you realize that it's not the actual gameplay that's hard, it's the conceptual challenge of learning something so different than anything else out there that's the biggest obstacle. But it's an obstacle nonetheless, and not the only one Oath bears. Learning this game is hard, like studying for a test hard, and while the folks at Leader include an excellent step-by-step tutorial of a first round of play, employing pre-stacked decks of cards, it's still very dense. And as I said earlier, the game can be temperamental. Experienced players have such an advantage because they know how to apply pressure and pivot their resources. And speaking of pressure, like other Cold Warly games, Oath is reliant on players cautiously watching out for opponents to capitalize on their weaknesses, and when people aren't willing to get into conflict, not just in combat, but in all its forms, balance gets kinda thrown off. My own biggest frustrations with the game came from the Clockwork Prince, the automated player used for solo or to fill out low player count games. As a bot, it's suitable enough to imitate the pressures of playing against a real opponent, and ambitiously attempts to adapt to various game states, but this was easily the most challenging part of learning the game for me. The rule sheet is opaque and has few of the hand-holding, learn-to-play considerations of the normal rulebook. The associated mind board is a dizzying flowchart, and the gameplay, while suitable enough when it gets going, feels far less cohesive than Root's quite good Clockwork expansion or the incredible elegance of Pax Pamir's Wakan. I'm glad that it's here to fill in gaps and present more options, and I personally had some thoroughly enjoyable games that were solo or 2-player, but from a practical standpoint, I feel like this game is best at 3 to 4. Oath is a beast, but one who tugs on my heartstrings. Easily one of the most original and fascinating games I've played in a long time, combining nuance and depth of play with storytelling and participating in something bigger than a singular session. I love that it's a game of few surprises. No victory comes unannounced. There's connective tissue throughout its mechanisms and structure that resonate beautifully with its theme. It feels expertly crafted and uncompromising in its vision. I'm not sure that it will ever topple the refined nuance of Pax Pamir or the sheer incorrigible strategic fun of Root for me, but Oath stands apart, showing that Worley and team are nowhere near exhausting the limits of their creativity. If you enjoyed this video, we have all kinds of other reviews, interviews, and recommendations via writing, podcasts, and video here on our channel and website cardboardherald.com. Our content is audience supported, so if you want to show your support, please visit our Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Cardboard Herald.